As you recall, we're talking about 6 buckets to classify your solutions into, the first one of which, the very important one, was feeling the customer's pain or unmet need bucket. The second bucket that we're going to discuss now is also very important. It's called pattern recognition. So I'll give you some examples of pattern recognition, and they will not be mostly from the biomedical field, but they represent the concept so well that I decided to use these examples. And I would challenge you to try to come up with some pattern recognition examples from biomedicine on your own after having watched this video. So some years ago, my students came up with a startup idea called MistoBox, Misto for mystery box. And what they did was, it was in the early days of this subscription field, where you would get a box every month with different types of gourmet coffee beans in it. And you would pay a subscription fee, and if you liked one particular sample of coffee, then you could go and buy the whole bag from my student's company, which acted like a distributor for larger coffee roasters. So the question is, how did they come up with this idea? This whole subscription idea originated actually by a few ladies at Harvard University some years before my students, who came up with a company called Birchbox that had samples of cosmetics that were sent in a subscription format to consumers. And they were quite successful. 9 months after launching their startup, they had 45,000 paying subscribers, each one paying $10 a month. They were getting the samples free of charge from cosmetics manufacturers who wanted exposure of their cosmetics to a larger population. And 17 months after launch, you can read the numbers: 125,000 subscribers paying $10 a month. You can calculate what their annual revenue was, and many consumers were coming back to them to buy the full-sized product from Birchbox, which was getting that full-size product at a discount from the manufacturer of the cosmetics. In terms of pattern recognition, what my students were able to do is to see a pattern in the success of Birchbox, and then to find an area that used that same pattern in a different area, namely coffee subscription as opposed to cosmetics. And so they were quite careful about the similarities. So women get excited about cosmetics, coffee drinkers are passionate about their coffee. Both are consumable. You need to replenish the supplies constantly. In both cases, the samples were provided for free by the manufacturers, and then in both cases, the full-size product was available from the company also. Plus, one thing that my students failed to mention here is that coffee is addictive, so people want to come back, and one might argue that cosmetics may also be have some addiction component to it, perhaps. So, of course, these were the early days. Birchbox was the first one. My student's company, MistoBox, was a early second or third or fourth, whatever. And now this area of subscription-based consumer products is possibly saturated. There is a subscription service for everything from razors to organic products to anything that you can possibly imagine. So again, the basis of this is through pattern recognition. So the process of pattern recognition involves deconstruction and reconstruction. What do I mean by that? So an axe is an axe is an axe, but if I deconstruct the axe into its various components and then reconstruct it in a different way with a different application in mind, I have deconstructed a pattern and reconstructed it with another application in mind. So as an example of pattern recognition, we will cover this in subsequent videos too, but here is a company that connects patients with a similar disease to one another on a platform where they can exchange information. and then takes that anonymized data, aggregated anonymized data about patient feedback about particular pharmaceuticals, for example, and then sells that anonymized aggregated data back to pharmaceuticals. So this is a pattern, this is a model, a business model. And again, I will challenge you to come up with an application of this pattern to a different area. So what group of people would like to communicate with one another where they could generate some feedback or value that can then be sold to a third-party entity in an aggregated and anonymized manner. And I'm sure you'll be able to come up with several examples of this based on this particular pattern. In order to facilitate this, the typical question that we may also ask is, formulate the problem as follows. If Facebook can do it, why not a Facebook-like platform for communications between patients, their loved ones, and physicians? A private, protected Facebook-type platform, for example. And then very similarly, if Netflix can do it, why not an automated, personalized dietary recommendation engine? If Netflix can recommend movies that we'll like, can we build a similar platform using the same pattern to make dietary recommendations, for example? So again, this is the second bucket of pattern recognition, deconstruction and reconstruction of a model in an area where it has not been deployed before is a very standard way by which successful innovators come up with new and successful innovations.